Hello and welcome to today's FinTech Finance Virtual Arena, and we're going to be discussing mobile banking apps and specifically the customer experience around that. So joining me today, I have Matthew Williamson, the VP of Global Financial Services over at Mobiquity, and they've just released a report when it comes to customer experience and friction on banking apps. So I'm really interested to hear what they've got to say. And also joining me is Mark Hipperson, the CEO and co-founder of Ziglu, and Muhammed Salim, Senior Product Designer over at Revolut, two very exciting new neobanks. So guys, first up, Matthew, introduce yourself and a bit more about your role over at Mobiquity, please.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Doug. So I'm Matt Williamson, as you said, Global Head of Financial Services at Mobiquity. We're a digital consultancy that helps build digital banks. Among many other things, we also have elements of healthcare, insurance, etc. I joined in the middle of COVID this year, which was a really interesting time to join anyone. And it actually has proven that the way the world is currently, that we need to move to digital ways of working and remaining customer-centric at all times. So I'm glad to be here today and with the other panelists, and we've got some interesting stuff to talk about.
Brilliant, yes. And also joining us is Mark Hipperson. Mark, could you also give us a bit of introduction to Ziglu, please?
Yeah, happy to. Hi guys, I'm the CEO and founder of Ziglu, and the new challenger that does crypto. We've only just launched in June after sort of working on our technology for 18 months or so. We built a sort of banking platform in the cloud, integrated multiple different crypto exchanges and multiple different FX providers to give you the best price crypto, I think in the UK at the moment, but we do full banking services as well alongside that. So we're happy to be around and launched, and now it's just about adding products and services over the next few months.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on the launch. And also joining us is Mohammed Salim, Senior Product Designer at Revolut. Mohammed, could you give us a bit of introduction to yourself and your role at Revolut, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, my name is Mohammed, Senior Product Designer. Been in Revolut for almost now 2 years. When I joined, I used to lead the design and payments team. And then I recently moved to the cards team. So Revolut recently has redesigned the whole app to be your financial life app. So a super app that cater for all financial services. So that's a small in a nutshell. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me. So obviously, as we mentioned today, we're going to be looking at banking apps and the customer experience and friction around that. So, to kick things off, Matthew, if I could go to you first, what do you see as some of the main takeaways around banking apps and the reviews that you see around that?
Okay, yeah, it's a great question. So I think what we need to be aware of is, so at Mobiquity, we created what's called a friction report, and we've made that for European banks primarily as a benchmark for their banking apps. This is made to enable them to understand what the challenges the customers are going through and how to solve their business frictions from end to end. So if you look at the insights we've gathered from the reviews, we've identified the most common topics and features that customers talk about, and then identified from that the friction points that exist across each of these. A great example is some users are unable to make payments, or they state their login page doesn't load, or even the app doesn't recognize the user. To give you an idea of how thorough this is, over a period from June to August, we went through 60,000 customer reviews to really get into a real in-depth understanding of what the real problems are, where the friction is, and how we can potentially solve that.
Interesting. And Mark, with that in mind, what would you describe as some of the most critical aspects of customer experience that consumers look for in a mobile banking environment?
Well, yeah, I've worked on the other side in Barclays for years as well, over 10 years in Barclays, and then the other extreme was that was founding Starling Bank a few years ago, and we tried to address all the problems that we felt there was in people's relationship with their bank, and obviously we found Starling off the back of the fact that things were wrong in banking, and you weren't going to cross the road to go from Barclays to Lloyds because they're as bad as each other. So what are we going to do to make life easier for customers? And I remember sitting in risk committee after risk committee at Barclays, trying to say, look, but we need to do this. Yes, there's a risk, but we need to do this. We need to accept there's some risk, and we see that a lot in these clunky things that Barclays still produce and that all the big banks still produce. We all know we don't need to do it anymore, but the risk and compliance guys say you need to. So that whole balance between the risk that we're prepared to take as banks and the user experience and the simplicity of getting on board and simplicity of being able to make payments. For me, the onboarding is one of the critical things, because you want to, from a perspective of, I get my customers downloading one at a time from App Store. Same as Revolut guys do, of course. I haven't got the benefit of having millions of customers, like Barclays and Lloyds and those sort of guys do already to be able to leverage. So the simplicity of onboarding is really important. And then the simple method of being able to make a payment, whether that's a card payment, purchases as they're generally called, or a payment using faster payments or SEPA. Those simple journeys that are part of every bank are really quite onerous with some of the banks. So what we're able to do, and I think if you look at some of the leading challenges out there, the ones that are starting Revolut, and I'd like to think ourselves, it's just starting the journey. We're trying to get that balance right to give people a great, simple, straightforward user experience and user journey, whilst trying to make sure their money's secure at the same time as well. And that's the challenge that we have in sort of the new modern challenges.
Interesting. And, it's interesting hearing about having that compliance kind of friction, being told that you need to use those terminals. I swear they were the best example of me being able to get away with not paying a friend because I just magically lost that terminal. So, in that point, that customer friction was actually quite beneficial to me. But Mohammed, could I ask, obviously, the world has changed. I don't want to focus too much, obviously, on the pandemic, but over the last couple of months, these banking products have had to change. So how have you seen the products yourself change over these last couple of months?
So just a small point to add, to add to what Mark has said. So in terms of what the aspect or critical aspect the customer will look at is, from Revolut perspective and design perspective, the way I see it is, you've got the convenience and the speed to outcome. So the convenience would be, is it accessible? Is it informative? Does it give the control to the users to actually finish the task they need to finish? When it comes to speed to outcome, how many number of steps you need to do to achieve the outcome you need to do. And that's, applies to any aspect, is it onboarding, sending money, requesting, etc. If you get these two nailed down correctly, I think from our perspective, it works fine. So in terms of how things has changed, in my opinion, from the customer needs or the way they look at things hasn't changed as much, especially when it comes to fintech. Like if I need to send money, I need to send money. But the thing has changed is, from my perspective, is the actual adoption from our team perspective, the product team perspective. How do we manage to keep up with the changes, the variables that the environment will force into us, things that will change, and how do you collaborate? How do you present? How do you make your point clear to the others? So all these things has changed, and we have adopted. The methods we've been using in Revolut, for example, the stand-ups and other stuff. Surely other companies have been using these things, but we keep it very close to each other. I wouldn't let anything be released without knowing every single details. I'll design it, I'll go through it, and then I'll work closely with developers and product team to actually make sure what we delivered is what we designed originally.
When it comes to the general customer experience, have the traditional UK banks managed to keep up with fintechs in the UK?
I think that's a really interesting question, and the answer is quite on the fence in yes and no. So yes, in some elements, the banks have invested in more UX, CX, etc., but doesn't necessarily mean they've fully understood why and what the outcome is. And Mohammed said a moment ago, it's about achievable outcomes, and what is it you're looking to really achieve? Is it you're just trying to make it look fresher and better than it did, or are you actually focused on customer requirements end to end? So I think what we're starting to see now is actually more of an ecosystem of collaboration, which I think both Mark and Mohammed mentioned as well, where you pick and align with people who can offer you the best outcome. And in that case, why would you compete in the same space as a digital consultancy or someone else who can actually understand your customer and deliver what it is you want? Part of the element that we'll work with at Mobiquity with our customers is to say, what is it you're really looking to achieve? If it's just a refresh, why? Do you understand what the real customer challenges are and frictions, so that we can help you achieve those outcomes? Because if everything you do isn't based on customer centricity, then ultimately it's just going to be another shiny version of what you had before, which ultimately can be a legacy product.
Okay, and speaking of those legacies, Mark, do you think that the fintech scene in the UK. Obviously you've just launched Ziglu, which is absolutely brilliant. Do you think that the UK still has that almost hegemony when it comes to leading the way in terms of fintech and customer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got the best of everything here. I was talking to a guy starting a bank in the UAE this morning, and they struggle with finding the talent to do what they need to do, and we don't. I guess legacy is a problem with the banks because they're still sitting on 1960s IBM COBOL mainframes, and I think there's only 4 new banks in the world that build their banking platform from scratch. Revolut's one, Starling, Monzo, and ourselves, Ziglu. So you're dealing with the latest technology there, which means that when we want stuff done, we can get it done really quickly on a really low cost base using Amazon's or Google's, or I think none of the ones I mentioned use Microsoft, but using their stacks and their cloud-based infrastructure to provide security that's good for us. The billions of pounds that those providers stick into security and resilience and reliability, and we can benefit from that rather than using old mainframe systems and stuff. So they've got the legacy and they've got the cost of a legacy, which means their cost income ratios are ridiculous, whereas ours are really low. So we can use the money that we have to invest in the customer experience and innovation, and we can make decisions really quick, in quick order. And one of the problems that I think you've seen from the legacy banks trying to challenge the challengers is they haven't got the mentality to do that. So it's not about necessarily money, because they've got loads of money. I mean, we built Starling for about 3 or 4 million, and we built Ziglu for about the same sort of money, although it's a lot more complex in terms of how we do it. Can you imagine just spending that money and building a bank, within a bank? Look at Nationwide, 100 million, as was, the failed Bow, another 100 million. So their ability to get things done and innovate, all they're doing is trying to catch up. Invariably, they're catching up the guys down here, the Revoluts and stuff, because they're leading the way in terms of the thinking, the innovation, the challenge, you're getting to market with cool stuff. And they're only just about keeping up with that because they haven't got a mindset to what is coming next. What can we do to genuinely help customers? And we come from that mindset. It's all about how do we make life easier for customers? How do we give them a great experience? How do we tell them they could go overdrawn before they've gone overdrawn? How do we help them save? We don't want to penalise them like, it's in the interest of the banks to penalise people and charge people. Genuinely, the culture of the challengers, I'll put Revolut in that area as well, although they're not a bank yet, is trying to help customers do the right thing and trying to help them save, try to make life easier for them. But that legacy is a big problem from the banks, no matter where you are, whether you're an RBS or you're a Lloyds or you're a Barclays, you're still struggling with that legacy. Even if you're an RBS and you do a Bow and a Metal, you're trying to challenge your challenges with new brands, but they're still not getting those right.
No, it is interesting to see those recent, I don't want to say failures, but obviously, the ending of these kind of speedboat banks. I mean, with that in mind, Mohammed, do you agree that that mentality needs to change when it comes to the old traditional ones? Or, is that the main kind of hurdle that they are having when it comes to decreasing the friction in their banking apps?
Yeah, so I think it's to do, as Mark has mentioned, is the mindset. The question should be perhaps reversed to them, and are you willing to change? Often people are afraid to change. There's lots of risk to take, and yet when you get to a certain stage of enterprise level, you get comfortable. So a small change could be very critical. So what they do is they just maintain it that way and just acquire others, etc. So I don't think, or perhaps my personal view on this is, I don't think they would be willing to change at any time point of view, because the way I see it, all the fintech or new banks that has arrived, they wouldn't exist if the traditional bank was never there. So they perhaps we're the children of this, so therefore we grow, and so but the parents will stay there. I don't see them changing. So perhaps they will help. They'll create a new, Barclays is a good example. They created this Barclays card. They created a new app, new team. Trying to do, and they've done a great job. But the customer don't see it as a Barclays card at all, and they see it as Barclays. It's one entity. So therefore, the change is difficult. Therefore, they need to either what's the right way to describe it? It's like it will take forever, or a really long time for them to actually disappear. But it's there. They've reached the peak.
Interesting. And do you think that, Mohammed, that innovation in technology, when it comes to creating a frictionless experience, has actually increased customer demand. Have you seen that over at Revolut?
Yes. So anything new you create, there's a try and error. So the chances for anyone to build a new feature or solve a new problem, the chances for them to get it right is zero. So the quicker you put it forward there, the quicker you can learn, the quicker you can actually make a better product. So therefore, the changes will happen, the demand will appear. So a good example in Revolut, sending money, for example, in the past, it was simple as select the person, send the money. But then later on, there was more demand around. I want to know how much the corresponding bank charges me. I want to be able to actually pay these charges, so the recipient receives the full amount rather than the friction, minus the friction of the stuff. So all these small stuff, we wouldn't know it unless you actually launch the product and learn from it. So yeah, demands do happen. It's natural course. It takes its natural course to progress into something perhaps you never planned to have.
Interesting. And you know what? I don't want to just focus too much on how the traditional banks are bad, and we've seen such brilliant innovation from guys like you at Ziglu and Revolut. But Matthew, could I ask, from your report, did you actually see some areas of banking app customer experience where the traditional banks actually excelled in?
With the research we've done, and when you look at the reviews, it's interesting because the topics that customers find most relevant when they're reviewing their apps actually include design, UX, things like performance, customer service, payments is a really big one, like not being able to send or receive money, or even simple things like design and login. Login and sign up. Where we compared the UK and the Dutch market, we actually found that 40% of users have satisfaction, with only 10% citing bugs. Dutch banks about 38% and 10% citing bugs. But what's interesting about it is the more you dig into it, people only seem to leave really good references and reports if they don't put a comment in afterwards. A lot of it is negative. So we found elements where, although they'll say they have a good CX, but then they'll complain the login doesn't work. So a lot of what we have to do is really dig into understanding what the real issue is and then what the tech challenge is behind that. So in this period, I think we'll find that you need to be aware of what your customer's looking to achieve, and both Mohammed and Mark have talked about this extensively, and understand what it is that's best for them. I mean, the great example I can give factor two, one of which is an American company called Wawa, who we worked with, during COVID, we launched a new digital app for them where you could pre-order hot food and various other things from a convenience store, and they actually saw a 70% increase in revenue based on the previous year, without there being a COVID challenge. So there are lots of opportunities for you to help your customers and ultimately benefit yourself. Another example Mark referenced earlier about digital banks that he's aware of is Ela Bank, which is a fully fledged digital bank from scratch, based in Bahrain. And we helped them launch that bank from scratch within 12 months, and we'll continue to roll out feature after feature afterwards. Because it's not just about we've launched something new, here we are, aren't we great? It's then what's the next iteration, which Mohammed was referring to as well. What's the next thing that will help our customer base?
Okay. With that in mind then, Mark, how can organizations like yourself, who are already pretty, when it comes to design and customer experience, pretty slick, how do you keep up with these never-ending innovations to constantly stay at the forefront?
Well, that's a great thing that we're able to do. So we had this morning a meeting with my team, the exec team, at 11 o'clock, and we were going through, what are the next 6 big things we're going to do over the next 6 months? We do a big thing a month. So what are those big things that we're going to do, and which one trade-offs against the other? And we have, a sponsor for each one. Do we do this or do we do that? But we've got people constantly coming to the table with, this will put us ahead. This will put us ahead. And that's what we're able to do. And, I think the point that Mohammed made actually is something that I passionately believe in. You can't do it in traditional banking, which is put something out there and see if it works. If you follow agile software development, it's fail fast is the expression that's used. But it's something that we can do, and I think it doesn't mean to say that you're disrespecting your customers. You're trying to find out what your customers want. Now, you can ask your existing customers. You've got 13 million in the case of Revolut. There's enough to ask. So getting that feedback from the customers is really important, and getting them to. But there is that whole Henry Ford. If I ask my customers what would they want, they say faster horses as well. So you do need to do some thinking yourself in terms of things you think your customers are going to want, and then try it out with them and see what they like. So doing that is something that I think the challengers do really well. Monzo are good at it as well. But you never get that with one of the traditional guys, because it's not the way that they think, or their risk committee would say, well, what happens if, we appear on the front page of the papers and stuff, and because, something went wrong or people didn't like it or whatever. And I think we need to be able to manage, I guess, customers, and regard them as the smart people that they are. And if they don't like something, they don't like it, take it off and do something else, or evolve it and make it better. So I passionately believe in doing that, and I think the guys at Revolut and Monzo particularly do that really well in the industry. You don't get that from traditionals, because they just try to catch up with the Revoluts and the Monzos and Starlings and Ziglus. They're always just trying to keep up. So what we're trying to do all the time is thinking, now what's going to put us ahead of brilliant competition we've got? So what's going to make a difference? We're not just playing catch up all the time. I remember when I was at Starling, we were the first in the world to design the pause your card in the app thing, freeze your card. And it was 3 years later we saw an advert for Barclays where someone was sitting on a bus and doing the same, 3 years behind us, despite all the money that those guys have got to do stuff. So it does come back to the innovation and mindset and making a difference to try and get things done, and having people that give a damn about customer service. It's not about making money. Money will come if you do a great job. The mindset should be, how do I put my customer first? How do I give them something exciting and innovative?
Interesting. And then also, if I could ask the same question of Mohammed, how do you keep innovating when, as Mark even mentioned, your pace is so much quicker than the traditionals? How can you keep up this pace? And do you think now that customers are certainly becoming more savvy when it comes to their retail mobile apps, are you going to be looking increasingly more at these reviews, or is this going to be very much, as we've kind of been hinting at, release it, see how it is, and then respond to that?
So it's to do with whom your demographic is, or with the users you're actually designing for. You need to understand that first. The second part is often the innovation comes from the smallest different things that you can make amongst others. So a recent example I have worked on is a subscription model. So if you check Starling and Monzo, they all have the schedule tab, for example, in their app, and you can just simple as you can get the subscription, you can get the stuff, and you can manage them. But what would make us different from these, the competition? So we dig deeper, and it hasn't taken much of time from us, I'll be honest with you, to actually research these things, because if you go to the web and trying to read about these things, it's just there. So the difference we have made is, for example, the small difference is you can block the merchant if you're not happy with. The second part is you can get an advanced warning when your trial subscription is ending. So what we saw is a majority of customers or majority of competition will never do this, or they haven't had it yet. So we added these small bits here to be ahead of the competition. So that way will help us to get more insight, help us to learn more, and see if this is actually answering a need, because sometimes we get confused between what the customer wants and what the customer needs, and wants sometimes can actually be a need, but a need can never go as back to wants. So it's understanding of these things is very crucial to help us design something, hit the target quickly, and solve the problem quickly.
Kind of following on from that then, Matt, is the fact that the way that finance is handled, and the fact that you don't really want to be spending too much time handling your finance. You want to get into the app, as Mohammed said, and then get out. Does this mean that finance and banking apps are never going to have the same kind of customer experience and reports or friction reports and reviews on their app sites as maybe tech companies like the Amazons and Googles, who are always going to have something where people sometimes probably want to spend far more time on? And do you think this is going to be a never-ending change and just a difference in the industry?
I think, it's going to be incremental in that there's always going to be change. And Mark made the great point of, the money comes later. If you delight your customers, if you give them more than they realize they need, even if that actually means less interaction, but more successful outcomes, great, you're going to retain customers. The big challenge that the traditional banks have versus the fintech players is customer movement. I know if we think about it, a lot of challengers came along with an idea of we'll decimate banking, and then either we'll become a huge, massive, successful bank, or maybe we'll get acquired by another one and they can onboard all their customers to us. as an example. But the reality is, we need to keep looking forward to what are customer behaviours. Mohammed mentioned it really well there. Want versus need aren't necessarily the same thing, but we need to be mindful of what's out there, what could be a benefit. And the ecosystem piece is going to be a part of that in how you build out your capabilities. Maybe it's a case of you want to build something out, but it makes more sense to partner with someone else who is, top of their game in that industry, but the capability is still through your application, as an example. There's lots of different elements you can do. I mentioned Bank that we built earlier in the conversation. One of the things we changed was digital onboarding. That was a real pain point that consistently is a pain point for a lot of banks. And we took it from, what could sometimes be multiple visits to a branch, so a couple of weeks or 10 days, is 5 minutes. So you download the app, within 5 minutes, you're on board and you can start successfully banking with your new account. It's that level of innovation that we constantly all have to strive towards to maintain either market share or customer relevance.
Definitely. And we did actually touch on that, Matt, as you said earlier on in the interview, but just before we wrap up, if I could do almost a round robin, starting with you, Mark, in terms of where do you see the highest amount of friction with banking customers across the industry, and do you think that a lot of traditional and neobanks will have to focus on going on into the future?
Well, we've deliberately tackled an area or two areas that we thought were problematic for customers. Crypto per se, and FX. I mean, Revolut done a brilliant job moving from an FX company into a broader, super app as they call it nowadays, and sort of repositioned themselves really well at doing that. And their crypto stuff's pretty good as well, of course. But we feel that it's 2020 now, 5 years on from when lots of these banks, these challenger banks, sort of launched, and there's still that problem of simple, easy, straightforward access to 99% of people to crypto, and holding crypto alongside your fiat currency. We all know it's happening. I think it's almost like the inevitable. It's happening now. Okay, we'll accept it. We didn't think it was going to happen for years, but it's part of modern day life now that people want to understand what how with quantitative easing and trillions of pounds going into quantitative easing and depreciating interest rates and currencies, we're seeing gold go up and we're seeing crypto go up. It's 10.5 today for Bitcoin, for example. That's sterling, about $13.5. So we can see money going into it, but people haven't got easy access to it. So what we're trying to do is to be one step ahead all the time and give customers what they want and see how they like it. And my God, they love the ability to be able to buy cryptocurrency in 3 or 4 seconds and hold it and see how and spend it and all that sort of cool stuff. So being ahead and making the friction of buying cryptocurrency was something that we wanted to address. I think we've done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely brilliant. Actually going out and targeting an issue that is only going to become, far more apparent. So Mohammed, over at Revolut and yourself, in your own opinion, what have you identified as, some of the biggest friction points that we're going to be seeing become more apparent in the future?
Yeah, so from my experience and what I've seen, the large amount of friction the customer could actually face is having or not having a consistent experience on all services they provided. So, for example, it is easy for me to view my balance, but it's not easy for me to replace my blocked card. So the experience there, it's not consistent. So I think, from every single app we've been introduced or actually come into the market, having a consistent flow that actually works everywhere we go, I think that would be quite a bit of challenge. And it's not as simple. iOS and Google Material Design has tried their best to unify the experience by providing you with certain components that can be used and understood. This is what you need to use if you need to do this, for example. But again, you get different opinion. People go, it doesn't look nice, it doesn't behave as the way we wanted it, and they invent a new way of doing things. So it's a wicked problem, I might call it. It's only time can solve it. It's similar to, for example, the nuclear reaction. No one in 10,000 years' time would be able to actually understand if you put certain signs. How would you design the sign to tell them this is a dangerous place? It's difficult. Only time helps you to actually find a good common solution to it. But, we'll see.
That's absolutely brilliant hearing about, suddenly this seamless nature of between platforms, which is something that we don't often think about until we're presented with operating on a different platform. So that's really exciting. And lastly, Matt, could I also get your input and your opinions from maybe what you've seen in your report as well, in terms of the key friction point that customers are going to be facing going into the future for banking apps?
It is the traditional login challenges or onboarding, which comes up consistently. That's about a third of users normally. Customer services is another one that comes up, which is around how to be serviced within the app with a challenge or even a query. We're still finding that a lot of people, if they click on a customer services requirement, it actually takes them out of the app to a web page, or a URL that they then have to scroll through to find the answer. That obviously is anything you can resolve within the app makes sense, whether it's a digital assistant or not. And also notifications. While in theory getting notified about things is great, if it just becomes spam, it's a real challenge, and then you're not going to get the desired outcome from it because you're just going to ignore it. And I think we're all guilty of that. If your phone's constantly pinging, you just turn it off and ignore it or switch it to silent. So the great news is all of these are resolvable. And just to summarize on what the guys have talked about, but I think any digital transformation, you have to realize too much tech doesn't fix anything. Innovation is actually about a cultural change, and that you have to want to look at it in a different way, not just apply tech to resolve the problem.
That's really interesting. You're hearing this kind of overarching approach that, you may have the slickest tech, you may have the nicest looking card, but ultimately if you don't change your organization from the heart, nothing's going to change. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, and to all our viewers, thank you so much. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at www.fintechf.com, and of course our YouTube and LinkedIn page. So I look forward to seeing you there, and goodbye.